What is London's most pointless tube station? Well, Bank is the least pointless. Because I don't mean most useless, I mean pointless as in, I gave 100 people 120 seconds to name as many tube stations as they could, because what I really want to know is, what's the most obscure station? The one that nobody remembers. I can tell you now there are 8 pointless tube stations, and I was really surprised by some of them. Bank scored the highest, with 54 people remembering it. In fact, it's the only station remembered by the majority of people who took the survey. But I'm not going through all 272 stations, so guess one in the comments and I'll tell you what it scores. You might think that the most pointless is Roding Valley, the least used tube station. And yes, I know, least used tube station, it depends on your definition. I mean, I'd say Kensington Olympia gets fewer tube passengers, but more passengers overall, and therefore is a tube station that gets more passengers. Does that make sense? Well, I can tell you that this would have scored you 3 points. A good score, but not pointless. Okay, go on then. Kensington Olympia. Maybe that's one, because it gets the fewest tube trains, but it hasn't got the lowest score. It gets 3 points. It's important to note that the majority of the people who answered the survey are probably tube nerds like me, and let's face it, you, which is why somewhere like Morden at the far southern end of the Northern Line can score 25 points. This is also, somehow, the highest scoring station on a single line. Chesham, the station furthest out of London here in Zone 9, scores 14 points, whilst the highest scoring station outside of Greater London is 31 miles away in Epping, which scores 18 points. There's a theme here. The average station scored 8 points, like Blackfriars did just here, but the average terminus scored 17 points. In a large, unevenly distributed dataset like this, it's probably better to look at the median score, which for all stations was 5 points, like Russell Square here, but for termini was 13 points. 12 stations would have been pointless if it hadn't been for one single person remembering them, like Lancaster Gate here. Yes, Zone 1's Lancaster Gate. It's not exactly an obscure station, but 99 of the people didn't remember it. And it's about to get weirder, because we're going to have a look now at the pointless stations. Notting Hill Gate is pointless. Nobody remembered it within 2 minutes. One stop on the Central Line, Holland Park, is also pointless. One stop on the Circle Line, Bayswater, is also pointless. Also on the Circle Line, Westbourne Park and Shepherd's Bush Market are also pointless. What's going on here? Have we all just collectively memory-holed West London? Then there's Great Portland Street. Pointless, but God knows why. I mean, 11 people got Warren Street just down the road that way, and 5 people got Regent's Park just up that way, but nobody got Great Portland Street. The only pointless station out east is Upton Park, so clearly I don't have any West Ham fans in my audience. Or maybe I do, but they're just trying to forget that they're West Ham fans at the moment. But I wanted to know what the most pointless station was, and having multiple zeros doesn't help with that. So I've consulted some secondary data. Do you remember that tube memory game from a couple of years ago, where you had to fill in all the stations on a blank map? I asked its creator, Benjamin Chunding, for his data on how many people remembered each station. Now his game's a bit different. There wasn't a time limit, and it's not about 100 people, it's just how many people total remembered each station. But nevertheless, when I combine the data, it turns out that the most pointless station is Preston Road. TfL, I think we need to do a public campaign to remind people that this station exists. I'll start off with perhaps the first and only fan cam of Preston Road. Okay, if you've made it this far into the video, you'll appreciate this portion, a nerdy deep dive into the numbers. Benjamin's data from his memory game players had similar conclusions to mine, but his least used station wasn't Preston Road, it was Buckhurst Hill, here on the Central Line. Well done to the one person in my survey who remembered it. Preston Road was only the 5th least remembered. Here's the bottom 5. People just really hate thinking about hills, I guess. And his most remembered station was Waterloo, which beat Bank into 2nd place by just 60 responses out of 24,000. Here's the top 5. Nothing too surprising in that. In one of the more interesting discrepancies, you'll remember that Notting Hill Gate was pointless for me, but in Ben's data, it's in the top 25% of tube stations. Looking specifically at my data, here's some stats for each line. I think it's interesting how most of the pointless stations are on the subsurface lines. As you might expect, the lines with more stations, particularly with those further out, tend to have less memorable stations on average. But I also think it's interesting how the Northern Line is so much more memorable than the Piccadilly Line stations, despite them having about the same number of stations. I'd probably put that down to the Northern Line having more stations in Zone 1. As a minor detail, I did count both Paddingtons, both Edgware Roads and both Hammersmiths as one station each for the purposes of this, because I thought it was a bit mean to ask people to specify, oh, it's the one on the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines, etc. I reckon that most people who actually responded to the survey probably filled it out in clusters. So like you think of a station and then you come up with as many as you can that are nearby or have a similar name and just repeat. So if we look at the Ealings, for example, North Ealing got 3 points, Ealing Common and South Ealing got 4 points, but then Ealing Broadway got 22 points. So 18 people missed out on 3 easy points there. On which note, it's important to say that this wasn't a competition. I wasn't taking names, there's no leaderboard, and it's not really people who score points, it's stations. Nevertheless, the average respondent remembered 27 stations, whilst 2 people got the highest number of 57 stations, which is a station every 2 and a bit seconds. Obviously, writing speed is going to play a part in that, but still very impressive. And any typing brings with it opportunities for errors, many of which I think will probably autocorrect just being unhelpful. So for instance, I think the person who wrote upset probably meant upme, the person who wrote Stockholm probably meant Stockwell, and then the person who wrote Sheffield probably meant Shenfield. On which note, some of you may be wondering where the non-tube stations are, because I did ask people to fill out the survey with anything on the tube map, so DLR, Overground, Elizabeth Line, stuff like that. But I've decided to leave it out of this video because I don't think they had a fair crack at the whip. Now, asking for that will have probably skewed the tube data, admittedly. But, for instance, there are 18 overground stations that came back pointless from this survey. And I just think, given only 2 minutes, you're probably going to start with tube stations and then you'll get to overground stations if you can think of them. So I might want to do the survey again just for those different modes. Depends how this video goes, I guess. I mean, would you want me to do another survey and we just focus on the overground or just focus on the DLR? Maybe I mix them together. I don't really know. I outsource my thinking to you. But I'm not going to give you any numbers for the non-tube stations, just in case it skews any responses in future. But for now, these are the unofficial Vaguely Mundane audience least remembered tube stations. The pointless ones. If you enjoyed this, do make sure to like and subscribe for more, and I would like to do more of this sort of thing. But for now, ciao!